not being able to see the forest for the trees. And that's actually not true. I can see the forest just fine. I just think the trees are a lot more interesting. So I took my revenge and I wrote not one but two books which are basically about the trees. And given the near worship of woodworking craftsman houses, almost literally about the trees. I do have to warn you that I'm skipping kitchens and bathrooms in this lecture and talking about the interior, because if I went into that, we'd be here, until 3 o'clock this afternoon. On the off chance that you don't know what a bungalow is, I'm going to give you the 1-minute version. Next. We couldn't get the remote to work, so it's going to be the next slide kind of deal. Bungalows are based on a native thatched hut in India called a Bangala or Bangolo. These are them. They were adapted by the British, next, for their own purposes into a kind of hip roof house with a veranda on 3 or sometimes even 4 sides. And they then built them all over the British Empire, or at least wherever it was hot, as being the appropriate housing for British people in the colonies. Next. And sometime in the late 19th century, they were kind of brought back to Britain, where they first appeared as a seaside resort, kind of second home. Next. And somehow they made their way to America. I'm not exactly clear how. And interestingly enough, they were first built primarily in California. This is actually considered to be the first bungalow in America, although it wasn't called that. It was built in 1875 in Piedmont, California, a town now completely surrounded by my hometown of Oakland. And it was the residence of the Reverend Joseph Worcester, who was a Swedenborgian minister. And if you know anything about the Swedenborgians, nature plays a very large part. So you can see it has a lot of characteristics that came to define bungalows later on. Shingle siding, it's very rustic, it's covered with vines. Next. And eventually, bungalows started to be built in California, and then they spread all over the rest of the country through plan books and pre-cut house plans and various magazines. And it's kind of interesting because most architectural trends in America started in the East and worked their way west, and with bungalows it was more or less the other way around. And what's also interesting is that bungalows weren't really embraced in England as part of the English arts and crafts movement. They're actually more of a post-World War II kind of thing. And bungalows actually went to Australia from California, where they're actually called California bungalows. So it's actually way more complicated than that, but we're not going into that. Next. I'm going to actually start with the more utilitarian aspects of the house, because I really like that stuff. And then we'll get on to the stuff you're probably expecting. This is a very lovely fuse box at a big arts and crafts house called Artemisia in Hollywood. You can see it's lined with marble, and it's beautiful brass, and it has little brass tags telling you, what the circuits are. And I think part of the reason I like this stuff is that back in the early 20th century, even utilitarian stuff was made beautiful. Unlike nowadays, where utilitarian stuff tends to be utilitarian. Next. A lot of bungalows had something which is now making a comeback for energy efficiency reasons, and instantaneous water heater. And this is the largest model made by the Rude Company. And the interesting thing about Edwin Rude was what he actually invented was the storage tank water heater, and yet his name came to be associated with the instantaneous water heater after his company was bought out by another company, and they decided that, his name would go on the instantaneous water heaters, and the other company name, which was Humphrey, would go on the storage tank water heaters. But you can see this is, has lovely Art Nouveau casting and whatnot. And this one is really huge. Your, average bungalow, if it had an instantaneous water heater, it would have been about this high. This one is about this high, because it is for a 10,000 square foot arts and crafts house. Next. There was even a brand called Bungalow in your instantaneous water heaters. This is by the Pittsburgh company, and I love this. The family gathered around their new water heater, including Sis here in her very trendy bicycling outfit, and Grandpa. They're just so thrilled to have this new water heater. Next. If you were going to have radiators, then you need a boiler, and this is actually an original boiler which is no longer in use, but it's like too big to get it out of the basement because the house was probably built around it. Next. Or if you had hot air heat, you would probably have had a gravity furnace. This was before forced air, so a gravity furnace basically operates on convection. And you can kind of see in the drawing here, the hot air comes out of the big pipe through this big grate, and then the rest of the grate around the hot air pipe is actually the cold air return, where the cold air returns to the furnace to get heated up again. And the idea was that the convection from this would heat your whole house. Probably not true. And then up here you can see a variety of boots and grates for heater vents for a furnace with actual pipes. And it's possible you may still have one of these in your house, sometimes call it octopus furnace, because they're huge and there are pipes going everywhere, and usually the pipes are covered with asbestos. But the nice thing about gravity furnaces, they don't make any noise because they don't have fans, although they're not as efficient as forced air. Next. So here's a grate from a pipeless furnace, and you can see in the center how it would come out and cold air return. And often what happens to these, and I actually have one, is when you get a more modern furnace, they just make this into the cold air return and keep the grate, which is a fine thing to do. Most of these furnaces burned coal until after World War II because there were not reliable natural gas supplies in most parts of the U.S., and then a lot of them were later converted. So you may still find a coal bin in your basement, possibly even some bits of coal to go with it. Next. So here's one that basically only has one pipe, but it goes to 2 floors, and with a very nice, fancy register cover. Next. Here's a very nice register cover. This is at the Gamble House in Pasadena, well-known arts and crafts house museum. Next. Oh, I love this. If you were very well-to-do, you might be able to afford a whole house vacuum cleaner. They were introduced in the teens, as well as be made to use them. So here's the, the suction device in the basement, and then, as you still have if you have a built-in vacuum, you have the little pipes